Hello and welcome to Let's Get Real. My name's Sue Eldridge and these are my fabulous friends.
I'm Chris Larkin.
I'm Ali Wilson.
And I'm Marj Russell.
Aren't they fabulous? I told you. Anyway, today we're really excited because later on we've got Nikki Groake who's going to come and visit with us, and she is the Archbishop.
Or Deacon, even.
She is the Arch-Deacon of Dudley. So we're really excited to have Nikki. And it got us thinking really about what our experience is as being a woman in leadership. And I know, Marj, you've got some feelings on being a woman in leadership.
I think for me it's been quite a journey because I came from a family in my generation, really. I'm from the 1950s that...
Surely not.
I
know,
40s,
but excuse me a minute while I just slap my friend here for suggesting I'm even older than I really am. That it was the men who ruled the roost, and it was the men who always had the final word. And so that was my upbringing. And also I was part of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church that I was in, because I'm not going to rubbish the Catholic Church, but the one I was in, it was where, you know, the priest... It's what the priest said went, it's what all those high up, it's what the Pope said. And so it's very male-dominated. And when I got saved, I left the Catholic Church, but I went into a church where it was the apostle that had the final say, and it was just that kind of where we were all at. And so I never really wanted, even considered that women could be in leadership. And I looked at how some of the pastors got treated if things went wrong in the church. You know, they got to be the bad guy, and I just thought, I never ever want to be a leader. And even my husband, who was leading a church, he believed that leadership was male only. But he went on his own journey of seeking out the scriptures and hearing from God, and he has done a total turnaround, and he is such a champion now for women in whatever role in life they have. He will celebrate their role. And I just found myself kind of absorbed into leadership, but I find it a real honour now to be in leadership and a joy to be in leadership. It does have its challenges, but I find it just an honour that God would trust me in leadership, really.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. I really like that, because that's what it is. It's a real honour, and it is, he's trusting you with his kids, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, I was a leader, I suppose, in the world, in a business and education context, before I became a leader in the church. I found it much easier to be a leader in the world, particularly in the 80s or 90s, where it was acceptable. But there was also that tension that women in those days had the big padded shoulders, the power dressing, and you meant to be a strong leader. But then you were accused of being controlling. So it's that challenge of being feminine, but being a strong leader. And so I battled that a lot and wasn't really quite sure how to be. So that was my challenge in leadership.
I remember that, though, about women who were powerful, women, because God has meant being called controlling and not submissive.
So how did you overcome that then, Chris?
I suppose I had a husband who honoured me and recognised in me what I didn't really see in myself for the church. I found it easy to be a leader in the world. In fact, I managed an awful lot of people in the world, mainly men. And they respected me and they honoured me in the workplace. It was different in the church, where I came across as being strong and powerful and probably controlled. And I probably was controlling, but it was learning how to be me.
Yeah.
Do you think you were controlling because you felt you had to fight for yourself?
That was part of it.
You had
I
to
think
prove.
also there was a tendency to control.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to deal with that, I think, whether you're a man or a woman.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
But it is more seen. It would be far more noticeable as a woman. And the controlling tendencies, whereas a man, it's just being a great leader. So it's that tension all the time, isn't it? Whether it is in the world or in the church, it is always that.
And if the woman was seen to be controlling, often you would hear that a husband is not ruling his wife properly.
Yeah.
So
Yes, Tim heard that an awful lot. I don't know what they mean.
Poor Tim.
Poor Tim.
let's all pray for Tim right now.
But there's a lot of teaching now, isn't it, about being a powerful woman,
Yes.
which to me is a strange word because I would associate that with being controlling.
It's interesting,
So what's the difference?
Because I associate with the Holy Spirit being powerful, so I am powerful because he is in me. So I guess it's how you look at the word powerful.
Yeah.
But I get that.
Yeah.
What about you, Ali?
I always had this feeling that I was called into leadership, but I was married to the wrong person.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so and so that always excluded me from anything in the church. So
Explain why that was.
well, we're not allowed to use bad language on here, but basically, as we will explore a little bit later on, I think I didn't have the best of marriages, and I came from I was married into church leadership, where my father-in-law would say, "My feet are hot. Would you go and get me a flannel? Go and get a flannel and cool my feet down." So that was that was the background. So I was not released to do anything at all. So I found my leadership very much more in the world and out in business and lead a successful company now. And it was only when I married my current husband, who is just so lovely and just supports and there's no jealousy and there's no competition, and he just encourages me and empowers me to be only what God intended me to be.
That's wonderful.
Not trying to prove myself to anything, but he just supports and encourages that to grow. He's such a lovely man.
That is so beautiful.
And I think that just makes such a difference. But I mean, I can remember having the weekends away for aspiring leaders, right? And Sue would be on those. And I would be at home crying because they were saying, "I forgive you." But everybody, all my friends in the church were on this inspiring weekend. And I was at home with my psychopathic husband.
I'm sure you can't say that.
Can you not say that?
Well, you can, yeah.
That's tendencies. He won't be watching. It's okay. So I'm saying, and just crying before God and going, "But I know that you've called me to something in here." And yet they're all saying, "You're nothing because you're married to the wrong person. You can't be anything in the church."
Such a difficult situation to be in. Yeah. Really difficult.
It's really hard.
That I can imagine. Well, actually, it was really interesting because while you were at home crying, I would be at these weekends thinking, "Oh my goodness, what on earth am I doing here? They have no idea." And I'd be thinking, Tim should have married somebody else, somebody that should be here, because I am a lot of things, but a leader is not one of them. And I knew I shouldn't be a leader because I was absolutely rubbish. I'm not allowed to say the word on God TV that I used to introduce myself as, but I truly believed I was worthless and rubbish. Bearing in mind, I got saved at 8, you know, so it wasn't that I wasn't a Christian. And so I would find it so hard being at those weekends because I would think, I've got nothing to say, I've got nothing to give, you know, and I'm holding Tim back. And for me, leadership and being a great leader, whether it's because I used to be a nurse and I actually had to stop being a nurse because I was such a I look back and I felt I was such a bad leader because I used to be in charge of the wards and I couldn't confront or deal with the stuff, so I thought it was just easier to leave nursing. And I was too loud, obviously, for nursing.
The patients couldn't sleep.
Well, it was when I was doing nights and I used to sing down the corridor that I felt it was really not the right thing for me.
So what changed?
What changed? Yes, what changed was so dramatic, and it was really me starting to choose. I'll say choose because you know how some people have something amazing happens and it's an encounter with God and Holy Spirit covers them and they might fall on the floor or they might weep and they've been prayed for. Well, none of that happened. I just heard a message from a very good friend of mine who is now, I didn't know him at the time, called Mark Stibbe, and he preached a message about God being our Father and a dad, and how much he adored his kids, and that I was one of them. And I remember sitting there going, what? I mean, I'd been saved since I was 8, and this was in my early 40s, and I remember thinking, wow, if I dare to start to believe that that's who God is, and if I even more dare to dare to believe what he says about me. And so I went on this tiny little journey. Well, it felt like it was tiny little steps, but it's changed everything. So I now know who God is, and he's my dad, and I know what he said about me. And so it was almost like my posture went from here to this. And so now it doesn't matter to me whether I'm leading 7,000 people or whether I'm at home knitting. Well, I can't knit, but leading myself. It doesn't matter to me, because my whole self-worth is tied up in who God says I am and what he thinks about me. And to me, that's the key for any leadership in the church, in the world. In fact, it's a key for life, and it changes everything. And I mean, guys, if you're watching this and you think, I don't even know what they're talking about, then I want you to know that whether you're a leader in the church, whether you're a leader in the world, or whether you, like Marj says, you just lead yourself, knowing who God is to you as a loving dad and as a caring father, and knowing, actually, you know, I haven't got one, but the Bible, what the Bible says, it's actually true. That's the amazing thing. And what he says about you is that you are the apple of his eye, that you are his treasured son or daughter, and that he loves you intently. And if after all these programs, that's the only thing you go away with, it can change everything. And it certainly will help you be a great leader in whatever field you're in. Do you agree, ladies?
I do. And I would say, I'd like to just share something about my journey, and that was that I would be at home crying, saying to God, do you know that I'm excluded because and do you know how he treats me? And God would go, yes, but I just want to tell you about you. And he would say, you need to deal with yourself over this, and you need to deal with that. And he was right. And I believe that was part of my journey to get into leadership, was not just knowing that I was that I had called to do that, but actually dealing with those things that actually would have made me really bad at it.
I had a similar experience to you, though, where in the early days of our marriage, I went from being single parent, so you looked on as a needy person, to suddenly being the wife of a senior leader. And my husband came home from a meeting and he said, oh, I had a great time chatting with somebody. And then he said, this person I was chatting to said so-and-so would make a great leader, church leader, but his wife lets him down. Ooh. And I hadn't realised until I had kind of a meltdown 20 years later that I'd lived in fear of letting him down. And I had some counselling, but God showed me that it's who he said I was. And
that's right.
So what if I make mistakes and bring shame on the family? It's a joke with our family. Did you bring shame on the family again, Mum? Yes! It's just a joke. But so what if I mess up? So what if I mess up? You know?
So what?
It's not a big deal to God, and he just picks me up and says, come on, you can do better than this.
As long as our heart's right.
Yes.
It's when we get it wrong and our heart is hard and we haven't dealt with ourselves, and then we're treating people really badly because of our own issues, and I think that's not all right. And God never allowed me to do that. And actually, I'm really grateful to God, because if I'd been, if you like, promoted at that time, I was not ready. Yeah. And I would have damaged so many people.
But there's another aspect where we've got our natural gifts, so we can be natural leaders. Yeah. But unless we're led by the Spirit, it can become very controlling, and it can be building our own empires. So I think certainly in the church, and if you were in the world, it's still about being led by the Spirit first, and then you can lead successfully.
Absolutely. And that's life, really, isn't it? That's life, whether it's leadership or what. That's being led by the Holy Spirit, tuning our ears in, listening, and doing what he says.
Courage.
It takes huge courage.
Because he might tell us to do something that doesn't naturally seem the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
what it is.
Well, ladies, that's brilliant, and I think there's so much more we can talk about on that. But we're going to take a break. We're going to watch this and come back because we've got Nikki Groake with us.
Exciting.
Very exciting. See you later.
This was an opportunity to change something that I couldn't change any other way.
I know if we fall apart, then what happens to our kids?
I don't know if we're gonna make it there. It's not worth it anymore.
I've had to learn to know how much he loves me without him being able to show it.
That's probably when I became a personal house of prayer.
I will still give priority to my wife.
The best part, love is the best part.
Hello and welcome back to Let's Get Real. We are really excited, aren't we, ladies? Because we've got Nikki Groake with us this afternoon, and she is an Arch-Deacon. So, Nikki, welcome. Earlier in the programme, we were just talking amongst ourselves really about the role of women in leadership. I'm guessing you've got quite a lot to say about what that feels like. Please tell us your experiences.
I have got lots to say, and some of you are probably wondering what an Archdeacon is.
Yes, please.
I always get asked that question, even in the Church of England, and I sometimes don't know myself. But actually, an Archdeacon, it's a senior role in the Church of England, and I work with the bishops in the diocese. So I'm part of the bishops' senior leadership team, wow. And I have about 120 churches that I have oversight of. So I look after the vicars, I recruit new vicars when they leave, I problem solve and troubleshoot, and I work for strategy and mission across the diocese and have some roles nationally as well. So I'm on General Synod, which is the kind of governing body of the Church of England. And it's a really varied role with churches both in urban deprived areas with which are very multicultural, and little villages with more sheep than people.
So in terms of where you are with the bishops, are you above the bishops, below the bishops, at the side
below
of
the bishops?
Below
yes.
the bishops, right,
so
okay.
It's just a part-time job then.
Oh, absolutely.
Lots of free time.
Yes, yes. So we don't like to think of hierarchy, of course, in the Church of England. But yes, so the bishop is the overall leader of the diocese. So I'm in the Diocese of Worcester. And then in the bishop's team, he or she, because of course now there are female bishops, although my bishop is a man, Bishop John, he has a team which is archdeacons, there's 2 of us, and the dean of the cathedral, and 2 or 3 other senior officers in the Church of England. But it's really part of the overall leadership team. So it's quite in Church of England terms, it's one of the more senior posts that a woman can have.
Wow. And what's it like, really, I suppose, stepping into what has been a very male-dominated role?
It's been interesting. I still spend a surprising amount of time in meetings where I'm the only woman and where a lot of the other people around the table are old enough to be my father. So I often joke that it's me and a bunch of old men again. Wow. And they quite often call me dear or Madam Archdeacon, and then they get very confused when because I often chair these meetings, so it's me and a bunch of elderly men, but I'm in the chair. And then they say, Mr. Chair, oh, Madam Chair, oh, and they get very confused and then just call me dear, which is charming, but part of my life, yes.
Yes. I have to say that one of my heroines is like Mother Teresa, and I think an amazing woman. I think she had the right idea. I think, like, for one thing, the habit, that's a really good idea, isn't it? It covers a multitude. You know, if you nip out Krispy Kreme donuts or any other kind of donut, for that matter, you know, it hides a multitude under there. I'm assuming it wasn't the robe that attracted you to go into the church full time. So, can you tell me what it was?
Yeah, certainly, yes. It wasn't the robes. Obviously, I'm wearing one of these, which I know that none of you are, but that's because I'm an Anglican minister. And actually, it's quite an interesting conversation starter because you do get... I was in London last week, and on the tube, people smile at you or sometimes scowl at you, but it's a conversation starter. But no, it wasn't the bling or the dog collar. It was a genuine call from God. And I've always been a leader. I was a sixer in the Brownies and head girl in my primary school, and so it goes on. And I worked in marketing for a publisher before I was ordained. And then when I was in my late 30s, I'd been in various leadership roles within the church in a lay capacity, and gradually had a sense that God was calling me to ordination. But at that time, I was in an evangelical church in the Church of England, and women had only been ordained at that stage for a couple of years. Right. And in my wing of the church, very few, because the evangelical wing of the church was slower to take on, accept that women could be leaders. Okay. So I had no female role models as leaders, and I spent a lot of time saying, really, Lord? It says in your word that women shouldn't read this, doesn't it? But gradually studying the Bible and realising that, no, it doesn't say that. And I found myself more and more thinking, well, maybe that is what God is saying, and started to explore it. Eventually, the Church of England said yes, and I've been vicar in 2 churches in London before taking on this more senior role.
Wow. And is that what you'd always wanted to do? No, I didn't even come to faith until I was at university. So if you'd asked me as a child, I would have had no idea that I would one day be Arch-Deacon of Dudley. But now I am in this role. I love it. I have such an opportunity to influence for mission and to see God at work in so many different churches, a variety of churches across the area. And my passion is to see people realise their potential and become all that God made them to be. And now I sense that I get the opportunity to do that in a bigger field. So I'm now enabling churches to be all they can be. And I think that's part of my leadership role is encouraging church leaders to go to the next step, and I have opportunities to do that, which gives me great joy.
Wow. It seems quite a number of years now since women were first ordained, but do you still find situations where people still think in the Church of England that women should not be in leadership?
Yes, and I've been very fortunate, very blessed that I've very rarely had actual opposition to my leadership. I've had lots of people, lots of younger women seeing me preach and lead in services, and they'd never actually seen one of us doing that before. And having those conversations, oh, maybe I could do that too. And really just by being there in a leadership role, enabling some other younger women think that they might do it. Obviously, within the Church of England, there are people who, for very well thought through theological reasons, think that women shouldn't be leaders from both ends of the church. You spoke earlier about coming from the Catholic Church originally. See, Catholics still don't believe in ordaining women, and the people from a more Catholic tradition in the Anglican Church, some of them still don't. And then some people from the more conservative evangelical end, because of headship in the Bible, have a struggle with it. But the Church of England is a wonderfully broad church, and we somehow mostly managed to work it out. And I, as an evangelical, I believe that it is right to be doing what I'm doing, because actually Jesus was radically inclusive of women. And there are a few verses in some of Paul's letters that I think were culturally in context and, about hats and being silent and all that kind of thing. But actually, if you look at Jesus, who is the author and perfecter of our faith, he was radically inclusive of women. So when I meet those who don't think that I should be doing what I do, I try and gently talk to them about Jesus and what he did, and love them, and try and just live out my life as a leader. And I have found over the years that sometimes people who were quite iffy about it have gradually come round, because they've seen me doing it and seen other good women leaders leading well, and then have thought, well, actually, maybe I was wrong. And I think some of them Some people, a very small number, it's misogyny rather than theology. They're the same kind of people who don't think that women should be doctors and head teachers and all that kind of thing. But mostly it's people who genuinely have struggled with scripture or tradition and feel uncomfortable. And mostly with those people, you can have a good conversation and agree to differ. Those who just think women shouldn't do anything in leadership, then usually you can't argue with them. So
just out of interest, I've been reading all about the suffragette movement because it's been coming up on the news. And I was really surprised to find that there were a number of women that opposed it, opposed the vote. Yes. Have you found that in your leadership? There are some women that still don't think...
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
More women than men, in fact. And
Anne Widdecombe lead the Church of England?
Yes, quite publicly.
Yeah, on the basis of that, she became Catholic Church.
I think it's interesting. I struggle quite a lot. Recently, in the last few years, the Church of England has debated at General Synod, the governing body that I'm on, about women bishops, and some of the most vehemently opposed women people to women being bishops were women, and who spoke very powerfully in the debate about how women shouldn't speak and lead. And I found that quite an
oxymoron.
Yes, because they were, in a sense, inhabiting a leadership role. They were elected onto General Synod, speaking about why women shouldn't be in an overall leadership role because of headship. And it made me ask, well, what is church? Church isn't just when we meet together on a Sunday. Church is when Christian people come together. So actually, they were exercising leadership. So it's they can be quite.
And did you point that out, Nikki?
I did. I think I tweeted about it, and my tweet got retweeted rather a lot of times. But
well, I'm so glad you did that. I feel like you did what you needed to do.
I mean, the challenge there is that all of us have areas that we disagree. How do we dwell together in unity in disagreement? I mean, that's the true testimony of our faith.
Yes.
Is what do we believe ultimately? Not.
And I have some very dear friends and colleagues who don't believe that women should be bishops or in overall leadership, who I love and respect and have worked out how to be with them. In fact, one of the churches that I have technical oversight in terms of their buildings, but it's one of our more Anglo-Catholic churches that is what's called under alternative episcopal oversight, which is a very Anglican term, which basically means that they will only accept a bishop who doesn't ordain women, and our bishop ordains men and women. So they've chosen to do that, but they're very happy for me to go and talk to them about their buildings and to be friends and in relationship with them, and even to pray with them, but not to preside at communion, because for them that's something which only men who are priests who are following on from Jesus can do. But we get on and it's fine. We have a good... And I think a lot of it is about just building loving relationships.
Otherwise it becomes very political, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And do we think this comes under the disputable matters? So where Paul talks about not falling out over disputable matters and being very clear about what is absolute about Jesus and Jesus as the Son of God and his resurrection. And so we're able to build relationships on those non-disputable, and this comes under.
Yes, I think so. And I think the church has managed to exist. Well, the Church of England that I'm part of, we do coexist with those who think women should be ordained to the priesthood and those who don't, and those who think that it's okay for women to be priests but not bishops, and those who don't. And it's a glorious muddle, and most of the time it works, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's when it gets messy and it's in the papers. But on the whole, we do it. And we, all of us, hopefully, are passionate about mission and reaching those people who aren't part of any church community, and men and women working together, I think, do that best. I'm a great fan of completely mixed teams where you have men and women, because we bring different things and we lead in different ways. And in some situations, a man working will have more effect for mission than I would, and in other situations it needs a woman. And if you've got both working together, playing to each other's strengths, using our gifts, being comfortable in our own skin as leaders, being who God's called us to be. And one of my favourite quotes, other than quotes from the Bible, of course. Of course, goes without saying. One of my favourite quotes is from St. Catherine of Siena, who said, "Be who God made you to be, and you will set the world on fire." Wonderful. So I try as
Say that again.
Be who God made you to be, and you will set the world on fire. So I try to be myself as a leader.
That's the challenge we have, though.
Yeah.
Being ourselves, being real.
Yeah, it is a challenge, but it's a challenge that many of us are like picking up and going, no, enough now, enough being what everyone else expects of us. And I think that having that relationship with Jesus and knowing who we're meant to be. Because actually being a leader, being on the mission field, it's nothing to do with being a man or a woman. It's to do with being who we were made to be.
And what we were called to be.
What we were exactly what we were called.
And do you think as well that some of this has gone a little bit wrong because when women are first coming to any kind of leadership, I'm not even talking just about church, we tried to be men. So we went in and we tried to lead like men. And that's where it all went wrong because we're not men. Because that's the only leadership that we'd had modelled.
Yes. When I was first ordained, I remember going to leadership conferences for people in church leadership in my particular wing of the church. It was the only time where the queue for the ladies was shorter than the queue for the gents, because normally, it's always. But I looked around and all my role models as leaders in church at that point were men. There were no women. And so I was aware in the first few years that I was struggling to inhabit my leadership role as me because I wanted to preach well, I wanted to lead well, I wanted to do church well. But as I looked for those people who were doing that, they were men. And gradually, I've learnt to have the confidence to lead as me, and I hope that I can now be that role model for younger women. And there are now many more of us. And it's interesting, the same conference, same leadership conference I'm going to in a couple of weeks. Now, if there's a networking meeting of women in leadership, there will be many more of us, and there will be quite a few of us in senior positions. So people like me or people who are women who are leading some of the larger evangelical churches. Still not as many as the men. No. Many more of them are in associate or junior roles. But gradually, over the years, that's changing. So there are models of how to lead in an evangelical church as a woman.
And the only downside to that is the queue for the toilets is longer.
Indeed, yes.
And we all know how horrible that is.
Nikki, it's been an absolute delight to have you. I wish we could go on because we've got so many questions that we'd love to ask you. But thank you so much for coming on. I do think that people hearing your story and seeing that actually you're pioneering in the Anglican Church and you're standing up really for seeing women taking their rightful place alongside the men, not as what am I trying to say?
Not instead of,
but taking their right place. So thank you so much for being with us, and I'm sure you've inspired many people. Yes. It's been great having you with us. Do join us next time. Thanks from all of us. Bye.